Welcome to Peer Meetup for Training Providers, a networking community of peers across the skills sectors.
My name is Stuart Pyle. I am from a company called Straplan. I'm also a non-executive director here at Pathway. I joined the company back in September last year as a non-exec, and my express role was to kick over the rocks, see what crawled out, and then work with the team to actually fix it, but also start looking forward at what's happening with this dynamic environment and how do we best navigate these waters. So I'm not going to give you a sales pitch. If you want to talk to me, feel free to talk to me. What I'm going to try and do is give you something. You've had sales pitches all day, I think, but I'm going to try and just give you something that demonstrates that you can actually plan where we're going. A little bit about me. If you ask me what I do, I'm a cat wrangler. And the reason why I'm a cat wrangler, have you ever tried to make cats all, want to run in different directions or head in the same general direction? Well, that's what I do. I get all managers within organisations, leaders of organisations, and I try and get them moving in a direction that is good for their business going forward. And I like change. Change is good. I think change is opportunity. And for me, every one of you that's sitting there looking at the future going, that's very scary. Actually be looking at the future going, thank you very much. You've just absolutely nailed all the existing provision as it stands, and everything that comes now is new. They've just levelled the playing field. They've moved all the pieces out of the way and basically said, here's a blank sheet, go for it. And that fundamentally is the mindset that I would suggest that most providers actually adopt. Because rather than being fearful of the change and hiding from it and looking for the systems that are the same as they are currently, let's say, okay, let's embrace this, let's see where it's going to go. Interestingly, there are going to be some fights along the way, and I'm sure I'm going to pick on ICQ and NOCN and even People First to a certain degree, because as a provider, and please bear in mind I tend to work with providers first and foremost, what we've got is a situation where there is a new space. So for long, there's a theory, it's called Blue Ocean Theory and Blue Ocean Strategy. And Blue Ocean Strategy is, if you are an organisation that can get into a blue ocean, you can set up the way you want and you've got no competition. The converse is Red Ocean Strategy, which is where the environment that you work in is so overly competitive that it's blood red with the feeding frenzy that's kind of going on in the place. Now, this is an interesting one because we've got a blue ocean, it's all new, but we've got a lot of players already in it and coming into this marketplace. And as a result of that, I think there is going to be a bit of a feeding frenzy. And I'll show you some of the conflicts that we've talked about as I go through the bits and pieces. Okay, so what I want to do is just, because it was on the agenda, is just give you a bit of a summary overview. Because we've talked about lots of different things in isolation, a bit of a rundown of where we are. EFA and SFA merged and became the ESFA. Non-DAS apprenticeship register was postponed. There are views on that. Some people say it was oversubscribed, £1.6 billion for a £440 million pot. Other people think it's because if you've got 2,700 brand new providers, then the irony of 2,700 brand new providers is the SFA needs to have contract managers to contract manage 2,700 brand new providers. And that's not working with existing infrastructure that's well experienced in paperwork. That's hand-holding people right the way through from the start. Alongside that, you've then got Ofsted. If you've got 2,000 brand new providers, you've got to Ofsted those brand new providers. And Ofsted do not have the resource to pull in those extra inspections. So I think all of a sudden they went, whoa, actually, how are we going to do this? So I suspect the decision is more so than just being oversubscribed. They've done transitional apprenticeship contracts for existing primes. So what they've done is they've actually come forward and said, well, okay, let's have an existing let's give everybody who's got an existing contract, let's give them a new temporary contract, a small contract to buy us a bit more time. The problem with that is the contracts they gave were roughly 10% of what the average provider actually needs. The knock-on effect for all of those of you that are primes is you're scrabbling to use your money directly for yourselves and grab a bit more. But for subcontractors working for primes, the problem is your contract has just been, sorry, we've got no money for you. We haven't got the contract size that we actually need. And because the actual, the non-DAS didn't go forward, that's left people very often with actually no facility to make starts. The levy employer registrations with the SFA is about 20% currently. So of all the employers are banded Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, etc. The SFA are working very much with Tier 1 and Tier 2, so that's your employers down to about 50 million, I think it is, 30 million, I think is the second tier. And then people with payrolls less than 30 million, they are expecting that we actually go for that, that we as providers actually target those employers. Interestingly, it could actually be, the reason why we're actually being given small contracts, generally as primes, is it's almost forcing us to go out to the levy employers to find our business. And then we push those levy employers into registering as levy employers and then actually getting them on board. So I think they're almost using us potentially as a mechanism for actually pushing forward, selling to those employers so that the SFA do not have to necessarily do all that engagement and marketing processes. And I guess what I'm trying to do now is make you start thinking about the world in which we work, what they're doing, why we're doing, what are the motives. We might not be right with some of the motives that we're coming up with, but if we start to think in this sort of context, what we can actually do is start to think about our businesses as they exist within this environment. And that, for me, is what I do. If you ask me what I sell lots and lots of things. There's going to be a list on the very last slide that I won't even show you today, but it'll come out in the pack. But fundamentally, what I actually sell people is thinking space. Time to step back from their business and look at their business. What does it mean to me? What should I be doing? Where am I going? What are the consequences? And that's actually where we're at. We've got mandatory training for apprentice training providers for levy employers. That was new. Nobody knew that was there, didn't see that in the guidance, and all of a sudden we've all got to have a form of mandatory training. You've also got to get on to you've got to get your super user set up, so you get your levy employer, you've got to get your super user set up so you can use the systems and processes and get through that process as well. Age grants are still there, but they finish in July. So those of you that can get employers on board at the moment, you talk about the employer contribution, 10%. Then the levy could offset that, but you've got that till July. After July, that is actually gone in most areas, unless they do something with it. AEB has been paused for PERDA, as you are aware. Again, this I think is going to be convenient, and I suspect will probably be re-looked at, because what happened with apprenticeships being oversubscribed, I think you'll find AEB was equally oversubscribed. And as a result of that, I suspect that they will use the election as an excuse or a break to then actually re-examine and re-look at what they do or what they did with that particular thing. On a slightly more positive note, I was talking to the SFA with regard to an advanced learning loan growth bid, and they let slip that they are looking potentially at a loans opportunity, tendering round if you like, because at the moment, advanced learning loans were left outside of AEB and don't come under the apprenticeship contracts. So again, and a lot of organisations, providers that I work with, are very reliant on those advanced learning loan contracts. And the problem is, they can't be subcontracted now. So the primes who have those advanced learning loan contracts, many of them now cannot actually subcontract that provision. And interestingly, not all subjects are covered. So you talk about cybersecurity and things like that, then there are some glaring gaps currently. And that has got to be addressed. And the process for accrediting new companies is actually very slow. And the last point I guess I want to make is that 20% of standards will have a mandatory QCF. But for the others, there is no qualification. It might be a recommendation, like leadership tends to be a recommendation, but there are others that do not have this at all. And that makes the space interesting, because what they've effectively done is they've gone from having a qualification, quite a rigorous qualification, I could call it a standard even though it was a framework, and they've stripped all that away and said all you've got to do is prove that you can do these things. How you get there doesn't matter anymore. So all the workbooks, the individual standards, the milestone markers, and all the bits that you build up to, in a lot of sectors, that's gone. So that's kind of an overview of where things are. And again, I wanted to put it all in one place so you could start thinking about how does this affect your business, where does that take your business, what can you do about it with your organisations. I think there are a lot of opportunities. And one of the things that, that I think, where Saf and I disagree, Saf says you can't plan more than 90 days ahead. But I think that I could plan quite happily for this time next year that there will be a college or a training provider that will not have spent all their money. And while I might not know the name of that organisation, and Alan earlier on picked up an example where he was asked to pick up an ESF contract, we've got 10 weeks to deliver £200,000 worth of business. Now here's the thing, he couldn't know that that business was going to exist until he got the telephone call and with a 10-week countdown timer. I would argue the point that you cannot know, that you would know that, because what happens is there are some providers who overperform and they take the hit and don't claim all their money, and there are some providers that underperform and will be scrabbling around to get that money in, because to not spend the money is actually a real major problem. So from my perspective, while I might not know which college hasn't spent their money, I can be pretty certain that that there will be a college or a provider that won't have spent it. Now, what that means is, do I wait until I get the phone call, like Alan does, and then he has a meeting with his team, energise the team, activate and engage and push forward? Or do we think, actually, around about April time, March, April time, do we start going out to the marketplace, start gathering up all our extra starts for a wish list, and actually have them ready, good to go. So when we get that phone call, we haven't got to start all of a sudden our engagement processes. That's done. That's in the bag. We've got those people lined up. We've got them pending. And we can do that. And I can say that for the next 5 years, it is highly likely that that is going to be the case every year. Some providers will, some providers won't. And that's what I mean by being agile and what I mean by planning for agility. You know certain things are going to happen at certain times a year by the way the funding is split. You know March is a cut-off point because of envelope 1 in a funding window. For those of you that aren't aware of ESF funding, works in 2 envelopes. The financial year, April through to March. Yeah. So what that means is that from April to August is actually envelope 2 in the previous year. And then from 1st of April, then you go from April to August, then you go from August to March as envelope 1. It's kind of counterintuitive the way that works. But what that means is these become distinct cut-offs that providers have to be spending their budgets by. And primes have to be spending their budgets by. Talking, collaboration, kind of what we're all talking about here, is where you benefit. If you're talking to the colleges, you're talking to the primes, and they get to the one of these measure points where they have to have hit their performance targets within a tolerance. If they have, they've got no business for you. If they haven't, all of a sudden, there might be a bit of funding available within that. It's opportunity, grabbing the opportunity where it lies. Another opportunity is that there are no contract limits for levy employers. Historically, up to this point, you could only grow by a certain amount each year. Last year, 19%. If you had an apprenticeship contract, your new contract could only be 19% bigger. Your contract as a whole is governed by size, is governed by how much risk you have, which is governed by your financial health and your turnover and things like that, profitability. Not anymore. If an employer wants you, then you can have that business. The amount of money is not restricted. So if all of a sudden you're a small provider and an employer wants to spend £1 million a year with you, that is their choice. They can do that. Limits are gone. It's an opportunity. A lot of levy employers now are publishing approved supplier lists. NHS have got one out that you have to join their approved supplier lists, and then what they're going to do, each of their individual hospitals and trusts are going to start putting through mini competitions, and there's quite a few of those starting to materialise. A lot of councils are there, so what Steve does, is scanning the environment, looking for these horizon scanning these opportunities, and then making sure they get put in front of you. That's not to say you must do this. That's just to say, this is where it's at. What do you want to do with that? And then you can either get on with it and do it yourself, or we can assist, or Steve can assist, myself, my team, we can assist with those kind of things if you so choose. But those approved supply lists are really important, because if you're not on them, you're not going to be winning that business. So if you're in care and you're not on the NHS portal, my best piece of advice to you is get on that portal now, because you're not even going to be into the smaller competitions unless you're there. And finally, obviously, potential of collaboration, strategic alliances and partnerships. That is big. I mean, one of the things is that they're looking for bigger and bigger contracts that people that being tendered for at the moment. And the problem is, as a small provider, you can no longer subcontract for a lot of these things because they're not allowing tiers of subcontracting. But what they are doing is they are allowing you to put together things like special purpose vehicles or consortium bids. So while you can't go to Pathway and say, can we join you be the prime and we'll subcontract to you, what you could actually do is gather together as a group of providers and actually put together a submission to cover the whole process. But as an individual, smaller provider, you can't really compete with that business. As a consortium, potentially you can. And that's why networks like this are really important, because there are people around the room you could potentially bring together and actually put cohesive bids together. I'm not saying exclude Pathway. Pathway still need to be in those kind of things. Get them involved in it as well. Have them as part of your partnership process. They've got good management infrastructures, so use their management infrastructures. Lisa at the back there spends her time due diligencing. Yeah, sorry, just wanted to wake you up.
Thanks.
Doing due diligence for providers, supporting their development, helping them make sure their infrastructures and systems are appropriate. And that support can still stay. That's not a problem. That can stay within a consortium submission as well. So there is opportunity there for you to collaborate and work together. There are, however, some challenges. And I won't labour these points too much. Removal of subcontract opportunities for advanced learning loans. Levy employer engagement, that's a big one. And I'll come back to employer engagement as we go forward. Employer contribution is a very real reality, 10%. Just as a sidebar on this, is that for those of you that have not really considered VAT as an issue one way or the other up to this point because you are paid by the SFA, you need to go back to the drawing board, speak to your accountants and rethink this. Because you've got to have a minimum 10% employer contribution, that employer contribution does not come under the rules for VAT. And as such, it's a VATable component, theoretically speaking. There are conversations currently going through at the moment with HMRC exactly about this, because it should be an exempt supply. But there isn't a notice out yet that says this is exempt supply. I suspect it will become exempt supply once they start to challenge it moving forward. But that is no advanced learning loans. If you deliver advanced learning loans, because you're paid by the student loans company, you might assume it is government funding. It is organised by the SFA, so it's government funded money. It's not. Actually, you are selling a service to an individual, and as a result, that service is VAT rated. The fact that it is a loan to that individual means the money process is there. I'm not a VAT specialist, not a tax specialist, not an accountant. But it's interesting, and it's something that, as a provider now, you need to go back to the drawing board and just check on, because the way this is changing is starting to cause some serious questions. And there are a lot of providers out there that are having issues in this arena and in this way. So let's just keep that, try and keep it clean. You're going to have transitional apprenticeship contracts. We've got apprenticeship reform going to, the adoption of standards. And again, and all the problems that brings with it. And we've got endpoint assessment. Endpoint assessment is shot through with problems. There's a loss of control over the examination process that a provider has historically had. We now no longer control whether somebody passes or fails. It's not just between an IQA and an EQA now. There is an independent assessment process. We've got the associated cost of EPA from, being deducted from training fees. And that is quite a considerable amount. We've seen a couple of prices on how they're going to do that today. There will be resit fees, potentially. And I know AJ kind of touched on, we might scrap them, we might not. But in reality, you need to think about how we're going to do this endpoint assessment process. Because part of the problem is, I said that we're actually all targeting the same space. Well, because of what we've done to the standard, we've removed the need for formal training, potentially, then awarding organisations, when they talk to organisations like training providers, they show us how they can work their system in and around a training provider. If they were in a room full of employers, what they would be doing is they would be showing you the model where they could say, hey, Mr. Employer, we can deliver this standard for you. We can train up a few of your staff members as your own trainers and tutors, and even potentially assessment teams. And actually, you can then compete and that competes directly with the training provider network. So on the one hand, we want to work with awarding organisations. But on the other hand, we also have to keep a little bit in mind, and this isn't new, by the way, this isn't just because of this, but we have to keep in mind that they could very well be competing with us in the not too distant future. Because if a large employer comes to us and says, well, I want you to do our training, But then the awarding organisation, EPA organisation, comes into the mix and says, well, you don't have to do all that really. You know, we can do that for you. We'll train up your staff, you keep the money. And as a result of that, there is a new dynamic, a new dimension. Sorry, I'm spanning. I stand by the fact that I'm representing kind of training providers on this one. So for the awarding bodies in the room, please don't shoot me. But it's interesting that we've got sector skills councils targeting employers. We've got awarding organisations targeting employers. We, as training providers, are targeting employers. You know, when I said that red ocean strategy, and it's become a bit of a feeding frenzy, then that is actually what I mean. So we're trying to all collaborate, and we've got all the slides that show collaboration, and we've all got them, whether you're a provider, awarding body, sector skills council, we've all got that. But what's happening now is that we have got a very much the unknown, and there is this environment that we need to work in. So accepting that as a training provider, when we have our conversations with our awarding organisations, with the sector skills councils, whether we register to become an approved provider, what we actually need to actually consider is how is this going to work for us and with us as our own organisation. That's not to say these aren't the right routes, but what I'm saying is stop, think, plan, put a strategy together that you are going to want to work with. And then think about what you can do with conflicts. So when you get into conflict with your awarding organisation that fails half your candidates, how are you going to resolve that? When all of a sudden you find that your awarding organisation or one of your bodies is actually competing with you in a negotiation, how are you going to deal with that? Because that'll feel like a breach of trust. And what's going to become really apparent is the quality of the learning that you deliver. And that really is important, because if you've got to the stage where you're ticking boxes and not really delivering value, then the problem you're going to have is your people won't pass the endpoint assessment because it is to a standard. And that is where the areas can break down. Regarding the apprenticeship reform, there are a toolkit, and I've got a link on the website. I'm not going to go into it now, I'm switching from frameworks to standards. There is a really good toolkit that's out at the moment. I've provided a link in my presentation. If you are seriously looking at this transition process currently, have a look at that toolkit. Okay, so priorities. I've got 3 real priorities for you as organisations. Priority 1 is employer engagement. Whoever holds the hearts and minds of the employer wins. That's it. Employers are a bit tricky. They don't really know what they're doing. They're looking for a deal, you know, and that is fact. In reality, what I'm saying is become more customer-centric. Focus on the employers. Put yourself in the mind of the employer. What are the employers wanting? And actually think about it from their perspective. So far, we've been building products, and our training looks like this, and we've been giving them out to anybody that we can engage. But in reality now, we need to stop thinking like that, and we need, as part of our process, we need to think about the employer, what the employer needs are, and actually that drives the service. And what AJ was kind of saying about individualised bespoke services, and even Andy from People First, is very much now about giving the employer real value and create value for money. You've got to drive a consultative style of employer engagement, and that's why that's listening, you know, listening to what people want and trying to build something around that. You know, you need to unlock the uncapped income and gain approved supplier status where you can. We've talked about that there's approved provider lists. But also, in order to spread risk, is look at your commercial and wider services. I remember once back in the day when I had my own training provider many, many moons ago, I actually ended up going into one of my customers who'd been a long-time customer of mine, and I was sitting in reception. I got there a bit early, and I was sitting in reception, just tucked away in the corner under the stairs, and all of a sudden, I watched one of my business development manager walk in the door and sign himself in, and actually get met in reception by somebody and went off to a meeting. And then I had my training manager, 5 minutes later, walk through the door. Up to reception, signed himself in, and actually met by somebody, went off to a meeting. And then I had another member of staff, one of my sales team, come in and actually sign themselves in, get met by a third person, and go off to yet another meeting room. And it suddenly dawned on me that I offered multiple strands of my business. So I had forklift truck training, which was virtually commercial. I had apprenticeship stuff. I had some employability stuff that was about job brokering, and I had a number of strands. And they were the departments within my organisation. They were how I'd siloed the business. And it suddenly occurred to me that I had one customer who actually bought 4 of my products, and we as an organisation were completely unaware that that one customer bought 4 of our products. It then caused me to look at how many customers we had where we only sold one product to. Because it's easier to sell new products into an existing customer than it is to find a new customer to go sell your products to. Almost overnight, we went from £1 million turnover to £3 million turnover by selling to our existing customer base across all our product lines. What we also did was we stopped actually having 3 or 4 people going into the same building on the same day to attend different meetings for different things, and we actually had more strategic meetings coming into that process. So think about your employers. What else can they do? The commercial stuff, think about it, because that, if they're buying it from you at full cost recovery, then, without being rude, that's not competitive. That's not competing in this funding. That's not dependent on funding. You're taking them away or moving outside of this competitive marketplace, and you're broadening the service offer that you've got and reducing your risk. Priority 2 kind of picks up on that point. Diversify. Look at what you're offering. There are ESF contracts, there are advanced learning loans post-election, e-learning platforms, local council opportunities, you've got traineeships, sector-based work academies. It's more than just actually apprenticeships, and that seems to dominate our thoughts at the moment, but there is so much more out there. We can be ATAs, we could actually even become apprenticeship assessment organisations ourselves. Just as a little curiosity.
What's ATA, Stuart?
ATA, apprenticeship training agencies. So it's an agency for an apprentice as opposed to like a recruitment business, but for apprentice. Interestingly, have you run the numbers on EPA? 3 million apprenticeships to be delivered over 5 years, 600,000 apprenticeships a year, 50,000 apprenticeships per month. Let's assume 1 day per assessment per person. That's 50,000 man days. Let's assume 25% of those actually fail and had to be retreaded. Add in another 1,250 man days. So in addition to the 50,000 man days per month, or whatever is the total number of man days by the time we put resits in there, that's a big demand for endpoint assessment. The other thing, those of you that play very loosely with your planned end dates as providers, then that is also going to be a problem. We're talking about scheduling these things. If you do them online, brilliant, that's all very well. But if you've got to have visits, how do you schedule so many endpoint assessments? How do you schedule a resit? What happens when the learner doesn't turn up and then books to come back in a week later? These are all very real questions that you need to have good, sensible answers to. Because without being rude, if it becomes a recharge, and I don't know, you've got awarding organisations in the room, ask them the question what they would do in that situation for a cancellation. They will still be paying their assessors to attend even if the learner is not available. It is likely there will be a charge. We're going to start collecting stats like DNA stats, did not attend stats. Because in reality, you're going to then need something in your contract with your employer to recharge that back to the employers. Because clearly, it's an employer problem. But if you do that and put it into your contract, are you going to be less attractive to that employer than somebody who's going to swallow that hit automatically because they haven't even considered it? So there's some strategic decisions to be taken about your policies, your contracting processes, and things like that. But diversify is the way to actually look at what you're doing. It broadens your service offer, it reduces your risk. So if any one single funding stream is pulled, you have multiple opportunities. You are not life and death by one. I work with a provider that their only business is advanced learning loans. And as much as I try and tell her she does not have a business come August, because she has no funding from August. By now, she should be well into her diversification strategy, not waiting till the shoe falls and then start to actually move that forward. So that's why I'm sort of saying, think about it. As you start to get these whispers, look at them as potential threats. Threat analysis, risk analysis. What's the danger? What can I do? Move yourself. If that sector is about to come to a grinding halt, move. Or retire. Whatever it is that you're going to do. Sell up. Merge with another organisation. You know, think of it. Do something. Okay, and my last one, and this should have been my first priority in terms of what I think is important, but this is what I actually think is where your biggest priority is now. And that is to develop new, more impactful programs of learning, because you need to create value. An employer needs to recognise what you do. While people give you something for free, it's free. They're not bothered. You know, if I give you a free training course, or I give you a free, I don't know, away day, experience day, you might go, yeah, that's great, thank you very much. And then you might not use it because you're busy doing other things and you go, well, I didn't pay for it, so it doesn't really matter. It has no value to you. People value things that they put their hand in their pocket for. Employers are now putting their hand in their pocket to pay for training. Albeit only 10% of the money, but they are putting their hand in their pocket. You can be absolutely certain they are going to want to have a deal. They're going to want value for that money. So the days of going into an employer and the employer's not turning up at reviews, the employer's not being engaged, not worrying about what units you actually do, all that I think you'll find is going to start to disappear, because employers are going to be going, I'm paying for this, I want a real impact from this learning that I am providing, which echoes exactly what was being said earlier today. And that is something that all of us need to go back to. We need to go back to our programs of learning. We need to look to see how often we're contacting learners, because if we're rocking up every 6 weeks, spending an hour with the learner, ticking a few boxes, writing up an observation, and then the following 6 weeks later, we turn up, they don't turn up, so we book the next visit in for 6 weeks after that. Not only have we got issues with not having achieved the end date, but we've also got a problem where there is no learning or impact from that learner in that business. There is no benefit to the employer. And employers are real sticklers about value when they're paying for things. And in reality, to create value in the mind of the employer, learning must deliver a business impact. They've got to be, those apprentices have got to be contributing from day one, because that is the way it is actually going to be valued, it's going to be judged, and employers are going to have this totally different mindset. Plus the fact you've got to hit a standard now that is out of your control. So where before you could potentially have that conversation with the EQAs where you go, well, it's not really fair to penalise the learners. We appreciate that we've not done it as well as we ought to, but we don't want to, we didn't ought to penalise these learners, so perhaps if we certify these and we'll do better next time. Those conversations with awarding bodies will stop, because you don't have that interaction. The learner will either be able to do it or not. They'll either pass it or not. And if they know it and can do it, they will pass. And if they can't, they won't. So that is fair warning. We, as a provider network, need to up our game, because there is a lot of practices out there. What is it, 35 colleges that are on the at-risk register now, under a notice of concerns? Subcontractors, primes, how many are falling by the wayside? Your positive outcomes out there? Organisations like that. Elm Training, £100 million training provider, rife, absolutely rife with bad practice. And this is actually going to be all exposed by endpoint assessment, because it's independent, theoretically, assuming they can sustain that. And that, as they say, is my 3 key priority areas, I think, as a provider, focus on. Thinking space. Stop having your head down, focusing on the emergency problems of today. Take a moment, step back from your business and look at it. Look at it in context of the world in which you're living and working. Start planning for it, because I think that is where you will secure your futures. And there's opportunity if you can see it.